having the community of people to call upon to help you understand and evaluate the data to make better predictions, to establish the right rate for the right risk is huge. And this is where I think there's some really positive things about open source and how it is changing and evolving our industry.
You're listening to Rethinking Insurance, a podcast series from WTW where we discuss the issues facing P&C, life, and composite insurers around the globe, as well as exploring the latest tools, techniques, and innovations that will help you rethink insurance.
Hello, welcome to Rethinking Insurance. I'm your host, Carrie Kelley. Today, we are covering a very hot topic within the world of insurance, predictive modeling, and data science, open source. We're going to talk about what is it, what are the pros and the cons, and how do you strike the right balance with a specific focus on the applications of it within the insurance industry. So thinking back 20 or 30 years, actuaries within insurance were one of the primary strategic analytical resources for the insurance industry. In the past decade, we've seen similar trends with the influx of data scientists entering the industry. And one of the results of this influx of data scientists has been an evolution in the analytical sophistication of insurance carriers. And part of this evolution has been further fueled by the use of open source, our topic today. My guests today are going to be Pardeep, Bassi, and Serhat Guven. They're going to share their views on how actuarial and data science skill sets are complementary and how embracing open source is accelerating WTW's ambitions to provide the best-in-class analytics and decisioning consulting services and technology solutions. So let's start with a little bit of background on Pardeep. So Pardeep is WTW's global leader in data science. In this newly created role, Pardeep will lead the advancement of WTW's data science capability globally, building on the WTW market-leading analytics and data science software, Emblem and Radar. Pardeep is most recently served as Chief Data Science Officer at LV General Insurance, a part of Allianz, where he was responsible for creating and delivering the insurer's advanced analytics and machine learning strategy. Welcome, Pardeep.
Thanks for the introduction, Carrie. Really looking forward to having this conversation.
Great. And then a little background on Serhat, who is a managing director here at WTW, and he's WTW's global leader of personal line product, pricing, claims, and underwriting. He's a 25-year actuarial veteran where the majority of his career has been on developing and deploying advanced analytic solutions for a wide array of insurance applications. Prior to his current role, he was America's regional leader of WTW's insurance consulting and technology line of business. Welcome, Serhat.
Thanks, Carrie. Also very excited to be here today. Very excited to chat about what we think is one of the more interesting topics that are going around in the insurance industry.
Absolutely. All right. So why don't we jump in with just what is open source? And Pardeep, do you want to kick us off?
Great. So open source, the term's usually associated with software development. So it's software development in an aspect where the source code is open and anyone can inspect, modify, enhance, make any changes to it as they please. But it's more so than just software development. It's more of a movement, a philosophy, which embraces open exchange, collaborative development. It's like a community type feel to it, common problem solving, speed to innovate, and just the transparency, just being completely open with what code's being used, how it's developed, and just complete openness. I think, so it's very much a philosophy.
So I'm kind of, when I think about open source as well, I mean, it's been a growing movement for the past 20 years, but it's been around a lot longer than that. I mean, think about Linux. Linux is kind of an old version of what open source means. And the benefits are pretty astounding. And as Pardeep, as you mentioned, things like innovation, flexibility, community, these are all elements of open source that have really been embraced by the analytical community. And that's created a lot of opportunity to become and to develop more sophisticated solutions within the insurance environment. I also think that, just with anything, though, when we were thinking about something like open source, just like any other philosophy, you know, there's pros and cons to it. And Pradeep, I'm kind of curious from your point of view, clearly as a, you know, from your prior experience as a chief data science officer, you know, when you're thinking about some of the pros of it, how important is it to have the flexibility and have the innovation when you're looking at the insurance marketplace? And I'm talking about insurance, not we're not talking about, we're not talking about like Amazon where we are a retailer. We're insurers, and we live in a regulated and somewhat risk managed business, because those philosophies of innovation and flexibility play into this space.
Insurance has been data rich from inception, and ultimately it's having that core source of data. It allows quite a few developments, unique uses of that data, unique developments of algorithms, unique processes and approaches, which really allow us to innovate. And I think most analytical teams, functions, individuals, data scientists, and actuaries, their real interest is on that innovation. Can they really do something which is new, something that gives them the satisfaction of, I've created something new, I've done something which hasn't done before, it's had a positive impact. So I think what open source allows is being part of a community where everybody's forward thinking and wants to develop and have a new perspective on things. So within insurance, ultimately, we like I said, we have all of the data, and we have been big users of predictive analytics for a long time. The insurance problem is also quite unique in terms of the asymmetric nature of the problem, and also you're trying to predict events which happen quite a long time into the future. So along with all the regulatory requirements which differ region to region. So with all of those three things together, it's almost like the perfect development ground for innovation.
No, absolutely. You're spot on. I mean, insurance at its heart is a data-driven product. I mean, if you think about any other widget that's sold, there's a manufacturing process, there's some raw materials, all that kind of stuff, and data is our raw material. And the ability to understand and leverage that data is critical. And what I've seen, especially in prior roles here at Willis Towers Watson and in prior roles that I've had in the industry, is that having the community of people to call upon to help you understand and evaluate the data to make better predictions, to establish the right rate for the right risk, is huge. And this is where I think there's some really positive things about open source and how it is changing and evolving our industry. I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit and because again, I think it's easy to be enamored by open source because it brings so many great benefits, and it does. But there are also some challenges, right? And some of the challenges are the same challenges that we face regardless if there's open source. And one of the things that's come to my mind immediately is the idea of which open source solution works best for you, and how easy is it to get trapped into a particular open source solution and embed your entire processes within that solution when something new will come along to replace it, because invariably something always new comes along and replaces it. I'm curious if you've thought through, I'm curious in your experiences, especially in your prior roles, what were some of the challenges you saw with leveraging such a powerful tool?
So I think open source is amazing for innovation, as we've just mentioned. But from an organizational perspective, where you have certain risks you need to mitigate, there's a lot of potential cons or areas to consider to partner with that innovation. And I think this is where our rich history in WTW in providing software which gives you governance, maintenance, support, and security all by design, we're in a good position to understand almost how to extract the maximum value from open source and contribute back to the wider society, as well as doing it in a governed, secured, maintainable manner. So I think one of the biggest things, having been a leader of a data science team, you quickly realize when you're using open source code, and just the nature of the uniqueness of writing your own code and contributing to open source code is you become very dependent on key individuals. So that lack of standardization across your team and organization is a risk you need to understand and mitigate. So put the right processes in place where, like I said, you maximize the innovative thought process and the ambition to do things in a new way, but you've got to standardize it so you remove the people risk. The average lifespan of a data scientist is 18 months. So within 18 months, you will lose potentially somebody who's written a custom piece of code, which others may not necessarily be able to fully understand and amend. The other aspects, very quickly, the maintenance and support. That's something which is just taken for granted, but it's something that needs very careful thought, because it's nice to innovate and create new things, but do you then necessarily think about the maintenance and support by design? Most data scientists would say this is really cool. I've got this new methodology. I've got this new approach. They won't build the maintenance and support as part of the process, and then they'll be required to provide the support once it's live. So it's a very interesting dilemma to have.
It's interesting that you say that, because here at, as you've been getting to know our team since you've joined, we have a pretty large technology group with well over 400 or so engineers and technologists. And it's interesting that when you're saying that, what really resonates to me is I was talking to one of our lead engineers the other day, and she was telling me that coding is, or solution building in technology, regardless if you're using open source or C# or whatever, or C# or whatever, is 10% coding and 90% maintenance and support and debugging. So it's exciting to get, it's really interesting to get excited about the innovation aspect of any type of development process, but the innovation aspect is really a piece of a broader industrialized solution that requires thoughts of, like you just said, maintenance, support, debugging, all the things that aren't fun to talk about.
Exactly, and we are breaking ground from a insurance perspective here at WTW, but not necessarily from a software perspective. And there's a number of other industries we can look to and see how things will progress. So you mentioned the Linux example before. It's quite interesting to see how philosophies have changed. So Linux is an open source operating system. Microsoft in the 1990s were massively against an open source, to the extent I think their leader potentially even described open source as a cancer, which they had to remove. But recent years, I think Microsoft taking Microsoft as an example, they've completely switched tact, and they are now the biggest contributors to open source code. So we can look to probably one of the biggest software developers out there, who used to be full on, we want to develop our own proprietary code, have our own IP, license it, to now understand the power of the open source and how to create that balance between governance, maintenance, support, as well as the innovation. So I think we are in effect following in the footsteps of Microsoft, if we think about it, in particular with respect to our radar release. Serhat.
And that's what I wanted to kind of talk about, because one of the things that we've done within our radar application, which is a market leading decisioning and analytics platform, is open it up to open source so that it is more integrated. So you're integrating your Python script directly within the application itself. You're working with the open source solutions in tandem with them, and again, we see that as extremely important for our clients to be able to, leverage the best of both worlds, have the ability to have technology that allows you to be flexible and do innovative things, but also in an environment that is secure and governed and for lack of a better word, safe. I'm curious, Pardeep. I mean, I'm hearing as we're as you've seen through it and as you've industrialized solutions before, what are key risks that come to the forefront with respect to just using just relying completely on open source solutions? What are kind of key concerns that our clients and listeners should think about when you're doing something in in a less governed environment?
So I think security is a very big risk that needs to be thought about and accounted for, because open source code is it's open in its nature and anyone can contribute and make changes to it. But when you use a piece of code for something as important as insurance, you really need to understand every single component of the decision that you're making, anything that influences it. So do you have a process in place where you interrogate open source code line by line, to ensure that there's no security flaws, or do you design processes in place with firewalls and the architecture to take into account there may be certain weaknesses, or vulnerabilities in open source code, and how do you mitigate for that? So that's quite a big piece. And generally, the pace of development is also exciting, but also worrying. If you think about, there may be a new package, a new package for a certain algorithm in deployed in Python. That could only there could be a possibility that's only just been released and it's only been out for 2 to 3 weeks. Do you adopt it or do you wait for wider adoption? Because open source community works when you have a significant number of people all contributing, all developing it. If you're an early adopter, you could potentially open yourself up to a risk of you've adopted it, you don't have the support of the whole community because you're almost at that cutting edge. So getting the balance there is equally as important.
That's an interesting point. I didn't think about it from that perspective of the fact that, but again, that's an interesting point. What I was trying to say is, when we think about innovation, we're thinking about it from the positive benefits of innovation, but innovation in and of itself requires failure, and that's a feature of innovation, right? Not a bug. And when we think about open source and we're using and deploying innovative libraries into our processes, how much risk of failure are we really willing to swallow when we're deploying something in real time or when we're deploying something in a regulated environment? And that's something to give consideration to. I'm curious because it sounds like from a, again, I'm an actuary by trade. Like, as Carrie mentioned, I've been in the industry for 25 years as an actuary in the analytics space. But when I think about, my experiences at the carrier, as a carrier and as a consultant, key things that come into mind are productivity. And a lot of the things that you're talking about that are required for effective innovation in the open source community sounds like it takes a lot of time and a lot of people. This is where I would argue maybe a vendor might be better situated to more effectively and efficiently create solutions for the industry. Of course, that's a biased view because of where I work, but I'm kind of curious, with your I'm kind of curious, kind of with your experiences at LV, how did you guys balance the decisions of saying this is something we want to build ourselves, or this is something we're going to rely upon from a partner?
So I'll start by answering that question. It depends on the maturity of what we're discussing. So this is a common problem, with open source, non-open source as well. Just you could apply this to absolutely anything. So when you are breaking ground, you have to naturally innovate and take more risk. So within an organization, within an insurer where I've worked previously, we were implementing machine learning for the first time across all the different decisions in the insurance value chain. And the real value was how quickly can we build and implement those models. But what we didn't have is the sort of longer term thought process, and it wasn't the right time at the beginning when you're doing things for the first say 10 or 15 models you build. There's more value in just focusing on the business problem and getting a solution out to market. But the longer term thought is, once you have all of these models, how do you maintain them? How do you provide that governance? How do you improve the efficiency of your data science team, which is a very expensive resource? So with that in mind, what you're looking for is, as the overall data science machine learning community matures, the use of software which is developed centrally with a larger budget by potentially a provider like WTW, almost providing a service to the insurance industry, saying, this is something you are all doing individually. We can help build software to automate it and do that more efficiently at a reduced cost to help the industry overall. So I think we're at that inflection point now where machine learning and data science isn't something new. Everybody's doing it. Can they do it more efficiently and then really focus on the real reason for moving into this space, which is innovation? So, yeah.
So it's interesting because what just came to mind when you're talking about productivity, when you're talking about resources, and even in terms of partnership management, I'll go back to the engineers that we work with at Willis Towers Watson within our technology group. Our tools like Radar are integrating with open source and will continue to do more to do so to the benefit of our clients. But even if you open the hood of Radar, you can see that it uses all sorts of open source solutions that are very technology and engineering based. And what's interesting is because Radar is a solution that is a state-of-the-art solution that is offered to the market and is licensed in the market. What we see is, engineering teams studying different open source solutions to make sure that they're using the right ones for the purpose. What I'm getting at is I've got a list over here. We call it a technology map. That it's about 300 different open source platforms that our engineering teams review over and over again and add to and study to ensure that they're choosing the right platform for the right solution for the right piece of the overall kit. From a point of view of someone like Willis Towers Watson, that makes sense because we're building technology solutions. I would imagine from the point of view from an insurance carrier, that's a lot of expensive resources doing stuff that are less directly connected to writing insurance policies, selling insurance policies, and building insurance products. So I find it's an interesting discussion. It's an interesting kind of path to think about, to say open source is way more than just Python, right? Open source is hundreds upon thousands of different platforms that, when put together, allow the community to come up with some of the most creative solutions out there, and they're driving the world we live in, and that's fantastic. But again, so from an insurance point of view, the question I'd probably ask as an insurance carrier is to say, how much of that do I need to build better insurance products? So, because I don't want to hire data scientists to study 30 or 40 different open source platforms and spend, a significant amount of time studying different insurance platforms to make the right decision. I'd like to do that more efficiently. I'm articulating in this manner. I'm curious if that, and I'd be curious if that resonates, or if that was reflected upon in different experiences that you've had.
No, I think it definitely did. So I think the question is, how do you make best use of limited resource that you have and extract the most value and understand where it is that you add the most value? So when you're in a situation where no one else is really looking at a new technique or a new approach, by spending that extra time and resource to go and find it, investigate it, and adopt it, gives you that market leading advantage. When you're in a situation where everybody's using this new approach, it's then who's doing it most efficiently. And because you're doing it most efficiently, you can then reuse that surplus resource you have.
As an actuary who spent his entire career in the insurance industry studying and quantifying risk, and living in the US, which is a highly litigious society, I'm kind of curious, when it comes to open source and you put all those things together, what are pitfalls or concerns when you're thinking about things like things like copyright, licensing, cyber risk, all that kind of security types concerns? Where does that sit in the modern insurance sector?
So innovation works in cycles. So I think it's good to take a look back and think about where did open source actually originate from and where was it originally used and the cycle it's gone through. So
Mhm.
originally in the 1970s, I think a lot of universities and academics used open source because they were openly collaborating on common problems. It was only around the 70s and 80s that um, quite a few academics were stolen and by software companies who looked to monetize and write proprietary code. And I think that's effectively this cycle which repeats over and over again, that people want to innovate and then they look to build something proprietary and get value from it. So we covered the Linux and Microsoft example previously, but again, people always look at it in one loop, not a continuous loop and continuous innovation. So I think Microsoft, when they did realize that they need to contribute back to open source and then work out how they take things back into a proprietary code and how to facilitate that continuous cycle of innovation, um, that's something we should really think about, because it was only now with machine learning and more compute power and new algorithms being developed that we almost went back. We as an industry or an analytical profession went back to academia to say we've developed these new techniques which can leverage the more data we've got and the increased compute power, and we've gone through this continuous loop again. So I think it's with that in mind, I think we as WTW have understood that and appreciate that, and we've opened ourselves up to open source. But we've opened ourselves up to open source, but at the same time, we understand that the insurance problem is very unique, and some of the developments we've made, in particular with our radar product, is something that I'm quite keen to hear more about, Serhat.
And that's because if you think about insurance, again, especially a regulated product like the insurance product, and regulation occurs in all sort of forms and fashions across the entire world. Even when we talk about unregulated markets, there is still consumer protection agencies, there's still regulation, there's still concerns that there's a need for transparency in the process. And the common theme that you hear behind machine learning is that it is a black box, which it is. I mean, most AI teams will tell you that machine learning is a black box. But so one of the things we did at WTW, recognizing that recognizing that transparency is an important theme in the insurance industry, is that we looked at machine learning methods, we looked at decision tree algorithms, and looked at what's going on in open source, and basically picked it apart to say, can we build an algorithm that creates the ability to get the right rate for the risk, leveraging the complexity and sophistication of the underlying data, but do it in a way that is completely transparent, so that the product owner, the underwriter, the claims manager can truly understand why the score is high or why the premium is low. And this is something that we've just released within our latest version of Radar that we're calling a layered GBM. Now, that's a technical term, but one of the things we talk about is this is something that we've that we've really developed to make machine learning interpretable. So no longer are we just saying, here's the score, and the score is the score because the machine told us. We're saying, here's the score, and we can now articulate in very clear and concise ways what's driving that score. And that's something that's very unique to the algorithms that are coming out of the WTW development shops.
That's very interesting, and hopefully we'll have many more algorithms like that, Serhat, which we build and release.
Okay, so thank you, Pardeep and Serhat. This has been a very interesting discussion on open source. We went over some of the pros and cons, but I think more importantly, a lot of focus on how you strike the right balance between innovation and governance with an industry specific focus. So I appreciate both of your time and discussion. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Serhat.
And thank you everyone for listening to Rethinking Insurance.
Thank you for joining us for this WTW podcast featuring the latest perspectives on the intersection of people, capital, and risk. For more information, visit the Insights section of WTWCO.com.